They said her dad died on a hike. Then a dog dug up the truth. Arya had stopped asking questions. They never led anywhere. Just vague condolences, government letters, and her mother's eyes that never quite looked at her again. They said her father died during a geological survey, lost in a storm, end of story. Until the knock at the cabin door. The dog wasn't supposed to be alive. Wounded, frostbitten, wearing a collar with no tags. But Echo didn't come by accident. He came with purpose. In a blizzard that shut the world down, he led her to what no one wanted found her father's last confession, locked in metal and buried beneath the snow. This isn't just a survival story. It's about betrayal, legacy, and a girl forced to finish what her father died protecting. And at the center of it all, a dog who never left her side. Stay until the end. Because the truth, it was always clawing its way back. Snow fell like whispers from the heavens, soft and soundless, blanketing the Northridge forest in an aching white silence. The trees stood tall and unmoving, their skeletal branches glazed with frost, casting faint, trembling shadows across the ground. Somewhere deeper within, tucked away from the winding ranger roads and forgotten by time, sat an old wooden cabin. Its roof sagged under the weight of snow. The smoke from its chimney curled upward, the only sign that life remained inside. Inside, the warmth of a crackling fire clashed with the quiet grief that had settled into every timber of the home. Arya Blake sat cross-legged on the braided rug in front of the hearth, clutching a worn, threadbare stuffed fox. The glow of the fire reflected in her wide hazel eyes, but they held no light of their own. Her long brown hair framed her pale face, lips pressed in a thin line. She hadn't spoken in weeks, not since the accident. In the adjacent kitchen, Walter Blake moved like a ghost in flannel and denim. His back was straight still, carrying the posture of the ranger he once was, but his steps were heavier now. The clang of the kettle against the stove, the slow, deliberate grind of coffee beans. Each sound punctuated the otherwise unbearable silence. He looked over at the child through the open doorway, his weathered hands pausing mid-motion. He didn't know how to reach her. Not really. They were both living with shadows now. The cabin, though modest, bore the fingerprints of a life once filled with laughter and music. Finger paintings still clung to the fridge. A wind chime shaped like a crescent moon hung above the window, unmoving in the still air. On a shelf beside the door, a photograph of Arya's parents smiled back, her mother, vibrant and gentle-eyed, and her father with his unruly beard and playful smirk. The glass frame was cracked, but still standing. Walter had never been a man of many words. Years spent patrolling fire lines and mapping unmarked trails had trained him to trust silence, to listen for what others missed. But this silence was different. It wasn't nature's calm. It was the absence of something that had been ripped away. He placed a steaming mug of cocoa near Arya, careful not to startle her. She didn't look up. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the pine branches like 1,000 secrets whispering in unison. The sound made Walter glance toward the window, jaw tightening. It wasn't just grief that had made him bring Arya here. It was fear. Not of man, but of something deeper. The forest had always held mysteries, some of them too old to name, and something about the crash, about how sudden it was, how quickly the reports had been buried, still didn't sit right with him. He walked over to his chair, the old rocking one facing the hearth, and lowered himself with a wince. His knees didn't forgive him the way they used to, As he reached for the book on the table, a dog-eared journal of field notes and forestry maps, he caught movement out of the corner of his eye. Arya was looking at the window. Not at him, not at the cocoa, but at something outside. Something listening. The next moment passed in quiet, but something had shifted. She rose slowly and crossed to the frosted glass. Pressing her small hand against it, she watched the snow fall, eyes unfocused. He thought she might speak. Thought perhaps a word, even a whisper, might emerge. But none came. Instead, she turned back to the fire, sat down again, and pulled the stuffed fox tighter to her chest. Later that night, as the fire dimmed and shadows stretched long across the floor, Walter tucked Arya into the loft bed, her parents' old room, now hers. She didn't resist. She didn't ask questions. She simply watched him with those unreadable eyes. Before leaving the room, he hesitated. "I miss them too," he said softly, voice rough as gravel but weighed with something tender. "Your mom, she used to draw wolves in the snow when she was your age. Said they weren't scary, just misunderstood." Arya blinked. That was all. Walter gave a final glance, then descended the stairs, each creaking step sounding louder in the silence. And for a long while, the cabin slept. But Arya did not. She lay awake, the blanket pulled to her chin, staring at the moonlight leaking in through the frost-kissed window. The snow outside glittered like powdered stars. Her small fingers clutched the edge of the quilt, heart beating slow and heavy. Then, as if from some distant memory, she heard it. A bark, soft, echoed, faint, like it had traveled miles through snow and memory. She sat up slowly, listening. Nothing, only the wind. She lay back down, but her eyes remained open long into the night, watching, waiting, without knowing why. Far beyond the cabin, somewhere in the white silence of the forest, something stirred. And in that quiet place, between dreams and grief, a bond, fragile and ancient, began to awaken. The morning light filtered through a veil of mist, dull and hesitant, as though the sun itself was unsure whether to rise over the forest that day. The snow had hardened overnight, not soft and powdery, but crusted like frostbite over wounds no one could see. Arya stood by the porch in silence, boots barely touching the first step, her breath clouding before her like a secret too afraid to speak. Walter was out back, chopping wood. She could hear the slow, rhythmic thud echoing between the trees. It gave her cover. She looked once more toward the edge of the tree line and stepped off the porch. It was her first time venturing into the woods alone since the accident. No one told her she couldn't. No one had to. The forest used to be home. It had once held her mother's laughter, her father's deep voice telling stories about tree spirits and the constellations carved into bark. But now it felt like walking into the ghost of a memory. The pines loomed taller than she remembered, their shadows drawn thin like claws. Arya's small figure moved between them, her steps soft but sure, as if following a trail only she could see. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to go. Faint snow crunched beneath her, muffled by time. Her gloved hands brushed past frosted branches, tracing the cold veins of leaves long dead. The silence wasn't empty. It was listening, breathing. Then she saw it. Just off the path, half buried in a snowdrift beside a moss-covered log, Something poked through the white. A sliver of torn leather. She hesitated. The air suddenly felt thinner. Arya knelt. With trembling hands she brushed away the snow, revealing a sketchbook, weathered, edges curled, pages damp but intact. Her heart stopped. It was her mother's. The cover was still marked with tiny pressed leaves and a smudge of charcoal fingerprint. The one her mom used to joke was her lucky stain. Arya opened it slowly, carefully, as if afraid it would disappear. The first page was ruined, water-stained and torn, but the second— wolves. Dozens of them, penciled in graceful, haunting strokes. Not wild or snarling, but still, regal, watching. One had eyes that looked almost human. Another stood beside what looked like a child with long hair and a stuffed animal, half-sketched, as if unfinished. Arya's breath caught in her throat. This had been drawn just weeks before the crash. She flipped further. Some pages had notes, scrawled quickly in her mother's hurried, looping script. Heard howling again last night, but too steady, not natural. Map shows ravine near Echo Ridge. Could be connected. Must tell Jack. Not just wolves, I'm sure of it. Arya didn't know what any of it meant, but she felt it in her chest. That heavy, aching tightness, like being on the edge of remembering something too big for words. A low wind stirred through the trees, and for a moment she thought she heard it again, that soft, distant barking. Faint, echoed, familiar, but impossible. She spun around. No one. The woods stared back. She clutched the sketchbook to her chest and ran. That night, the wind howled louder. The cabin creaked under its weight, like old bones resisting time. Arya sat curled on her bed in the loft, the recovered sketchbook hidden beneath her pillow. She hadn't told Walter, not because she wanted to keep secrets, but because something about the drawings felt sacred, like they weren't ready to be spoken aloud. She stared at the window. The forest was dark now, only pale snow and the silhouettes of trees swaying like mourners. She thought of the wolves in the sketchbook, of the way they looked out from the page, not menacing, but knowing, as if they were guarding something. She lay down, eyes wide open, and dreamed. In the dream, she stood in a clearing, surrounded by snow that glowed silver under a sky full of stars. From the edge of the woods, wolves emerged one by one. They didn't growl. They didn't stalk. They circled her with quiet reverence, tails low, heads bowed. Then one stepped forward, not the biggest, but the one with the eyes from the sketch. It leaned close. Arya reached out and woke with a gasp. Darkness clung to the room like mist. She sat up, heart racing. That's when she heard it. Not the dream wolves, not the wind, but barking, real, distant, muffled by trees and snow, but unmistakable. It wasn't wild. It wasn't panicked. It was calling. She threw off the covers, ran to the window, pressed her hands to the glass. Nothing. Only snow and trees and silence. But deep down, in the place grief hadn't managed to hollow out yet, something stirred. Something old, something waiting. The storm came faster than they expected. By mid-afternoon, the trees howled with a low, grating wind, hurling snow sideways in frantic waves. The sky was a gray, so deep it felt almost blue, pressing low on the forest like a warning. Arya wrapped her scarf twice around her neck, tugged on Walter's old parka, and pulled the sled behind her with mittened hands. She was only supposed to gather kindling before the drifts grew too high. Walter had warned her. 10 minutes. No more. But the forest had its own clock, and it was easy to lose time when you were surrounded by the sound of your own breath. She walked further than usual, past the stump line where the old trees grew gnarled and the snow layered in sheets like undisturbed history. She was just reaching for a cluster of dry twigs beneath a pine when she heard it, a sound too faint to be wind. A whimper. She froze. For a moment she thought it was in her head again, like the barking from the night before. But then it came again, sharper this time, closer. Arya dropped the kindling. Carefully she stepped off the path, boots crunching lightly as she followed the sound, one cautious step at a time. Behind a fallen log, half buried under a tangle of snow and branches, she saw it. A dog, a pup, maybe a year old at most, German shepherd by the look of him. His coat was streaked with mud, his flank matted with blood that soaked red through the snow. One eye barely opened. His breathing came in shallow, shuddering bursts, and around his neck, half frozen into the fur, was a black collar marked in fading white, K972 Echo. Arya's breath caught. Her legs went numb, not from cold, but from fear. And something else. Recognition. She didn't know how, but something about him felt familiar, like a shape her heart had been holding without realizing. The pup stirred, a soft whimper escaping his throat. Without thinking, she dropped to her knees. Her hands trembled as she reached out. He flinched, but didn't growl, didn't bite. Carefully, she peeled off her scarf and slid it beneath his neck, wrapping it around his shivering body. Her eyes stung. Whether from the wind or the sight, she couldn't tell. "It's okay," she whispered, voice trembling. "I've got you." She didn't think of the distance or the cold. She just lifted him, awkwardly, protectively, into the sled and began to pull. By the time she reached the cabin, her legs burned, and her hands were so numb she could barely grip the sled's rope. Snow whipped across the porch in sheets, and she had to shout to be heard. "Grandpa!" Walter swung open the door with a lantern in hand. The light hit her face, flushed, wet, wild, and then dropped to the form in the sled. His expression changed instantly. "Arya, what in God's name?" "He's hurt. I found him near the ridge." Her voice cracked. "He was bleeding. He has a collar. He's a K9. Walter stepped forward, inspecting the pup without touching. His brows furrowed, his mouth pressed into a thin, wary line. "He's half dead." "I know," she whispered. "Please." Walter was silent for a long moment, snow swirling between them. Then he sighed, heavy and reluctant, and opened the door wider. "Just for tonight," he muttered. "He stays by the stove, and he goes to animal control tomorrow." Arya didn't argue. She carried the pup inside like something sacred. The living room glowed dimly, lit by firelight and the last gold threads of lanterns. The pup lay wrapped in her scarf, shivering beside the hearth. Arya knelt over him with a basin of warm water and a towel, her fingers red but gentle. Walter stood behind her, arms crossed, the worry on his face poorly disguised. She cleaned the blood from his fur slowly, whispering to him, though he barely stirred. She found a cut along his leg, deep but clean, and pressed a cloth to it, wincing as he whimpered. "He's got a fighting chance," she said quietly, "if we help." Walter didn't respond. He was staring at the collar now. K972, he read aloud. That's not just any dog. That's government designation. Arya looked up. You think he escaped? Walter didn't answer, but his silence said enough. After a while he grabbed a blanket, draped it over the pup, and sat down at the table without a word. Arya didn't leave the pup's side that night. Long after the storm raged outside and the windows fogged with frost, she stayed curled beside him, one hand resting lightly on his back, feeling each slow breath like the beat of something beginning again. The pup didn't move, but in the quiet his ears twitched once toward her voice, toward her heartbeat, as if, even in pain, some part of him recognized her too. And though she didn't say it aloud, she already knew his name. The snowstorm passed, but its silence lingered like smoke. 3 days had gone by since Arya pulled the injured pup home on the sled. Since then, the cabin had become a fragile, in-between space, quiet, cautious, haunted. The dog hadn't moved much from the corner by the fire. He curled into himself like a shadow, tensed, watchful, his breathing shallow. The wound on his leg had scabbed over, but he refused food, refused touch, refused Walter entirely. Only Arya could sit near him. Even then, he wouldn't meet her eyes. Walter tried to act like it was temporary. He's in shock, he muttered on the second morning, setting a bowl of warmed broth down near the pup's front paws. Or maybe just feral. His voice was rough, but not without worry. Could be he saw something out there. God knows what they put these dogs through. He knelt carefully, holding a small hand scanner to the collar. Let's see if you've got a story, K972. The scanner beeped once, then again, then blinked red. No data. Walter frowned, checked the battery, tried again. Still nothing. No signal, no chip, or it's wiped. He looked at Arya over his shoulder. This one's a ghost. She didn't answer. Just stared at the dog, his ears flat, his eyes distant, as if the world was still too loud for him to exist in. That night, after Walter had gone to bed, Arya returned to the corner near the hearth, cradling a cloth-wrapped piece of jerky in her hands. She moved slowly, letting the floorboards creak so he'd hear her coming. She crouched beside him, unwrapped the food, and set it gently between them. "I know you don't trust us," she whispered, her voice barely audible, like a song forgotten for too long. "It's okay. I don't trust anyone either." The pup didn't look at her. But he didn't move away. His breathing was faster now, ears twitching, eyes flickering. Not quite fear, not quite curiosity. Arya sat down, cross-legged, careful to keep a few feet between them. She watched him out of the corner of her eye. The jerky sat untouched. She waited. And then, like a slow uncoiling, he inched forward, one paw at a time. Every movement cautious, hesitant. But when his nose touched the jerky, and his jaw finally closed around it, Arya felt her heart do something it hadn't done in months. It warmed. She exhaled, slow and deep, and spoke again. "My mom used to draw wolves," she said, her voice raw but steady. "She said they were lonely creatures, brave and afraid at the same time." Her eyes glazed, but she didn't stop. "She used to call me Little Wolf when I had nightmares. Said that even when you're scared, you still have teeth. You still have a heart." The pup chewed quietly. His ears were up now, listening. Something inside Arya cracked open gently, like thawing ice. I haven't talked since they died, she confessed. Not really. Not like this. Her fingers curled into the rug, clutching something invisible. But I think maybe you know what that's like, being broken in a place people can't see. The pup looked at her then. Not a long look, not dramatic. Just a flicker. A second. But it was enough. And in that quiet moment between girl and dog, something passed between them, unspoken and true. A shared wound. A breath held too long. She reached out slowly, letting her fingers rest just near his paw. Not touching, just there. He didn't pull away. That night, she stayed beside him until her eyelids fluttered closed and her hand slumped to the floor. The fire cast long, flickering shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind howled through the trees like distant voices calling to things lost. Inside, he moved just slightly. The pup shifted closer, laid his head on her ankle, and for the first time since being dragged from the woods, he slept without flinching. Walter found them that way the next morning. Arya curled on the floor like a question mark, one arm limp beside the dog's sleeping frame. The scarf she'd wrapped him in was draped over both of them like a shared memory. The pup stirred when Walter stepped forward, eyes sharp, alert. But he didn't growl, didn't run. Walter stood there, jaw tight, heart thudding with something unspoken. "Well, hell," he muttered. "You picked your person." He walked into the kitchen without another word, and from the hearth the broken dog watched him go with eyes that, for the first time, held more than pain. They held a beginning. The morning frost lingered on the cabin windows like breath held too long. Walter crouched beside the wood stove, pouring boiled water into a chipped tin basin. His hands moved with practiced rhythm, but there was tension in the set of his jaw like he already knew today would ask more of him than he wanted to give. Arya sat on the floor with her back against the log wall, knees hugged to her chest. Echo lay beside her, head resting between his paws, eyes watching Walter's every move with a low, steady suspicion. "He's got infection setting in," Walter said gruffly. "If I don't clean the wound, he's going to lose the leg. Or worse." Arya didn't answer. She only reached down and brushed Echo's fur with her fingers, so gently it looked more like an apology than affection. Walter approached slowly, basin in one hand, gauze and iodine in the other. He stopped 2 feet short of the dog. Echo raised his head. A low growl rumbled from his throat, not loud but primal, like something buried too long that had clawed its way back to the surface. "Easy now," Walter muttered. "I ain't gonna hurt you." He extended the gauze. In an instant, it happened. A flash of teeth. A blur of fur. The basin clattered to the floor, hot water spilling across the planks. Walter staggered back, gripping his forearm. Blood seeped through the sleeve of his flannel shirt, 3 deep punctures, clean but angry. Arya screamed, a sharp, raw sound that hadn't left her mouth in months. Echo backed into the corner, body low, teeth bared. His eyes were wild, more animal than anything else. Walter cursed under his breath and pressed a rag to the wound. "That's it," he snapped. "I've seen this before. Trauma dogs, military dropouts. They're fine until they snap and then someone ends up dead." Arya rushed to his side, voice shaking. "He didn't mean to." "You think that matters?" Walter's voice rose. "Next time it might be you, Arya, or some poor ranger in the woods. I gave him a chance, but this is too far." "He was scared," she cried. You moved too fast. He thought you were going to hurt him." Walter's face hardened. "I don't care how scared he is. That dog is dangerous." Echo whimpered from the corner, his tail tucked, his body trembling. "He's not dangerous," Arya said, her voice cracking. "He's just broken." Something in her collapsed then. Her legs buckled, and she slid to the floor. Tears streamed down her cheeks, hot and silent and unrelenting, the kind of crying that comes not from the moment itself, but from everything that came before. Walter froze. He hadn't seen her cry since the accident, not when she woke up screaming, not when the social worker handed over the custody papers, not even at the funeral. But now, over this dog, she wept like her heart couldn't hold it anymore. Walter looked at her, really looked, her small shoulders shaking, her eyes wide with grief. Her hand stretched out, not toward him, but toward the creature that had just torn his skin, and in that moment he saw something that twisted deep in his chest. Not rebellion, not childish defiance, but need, desperate, aching need for connection, for something alive to believe in. He let out a long, bitter sigh. Then slowly, he walked to the kitchen sink, ran cold water over the wound, and wrapped his arm with a dish towel. Behind him, Arya's sobs softened to hiccups. Finally, he turned around. "1 week," he said gruffly. "That's it. 1 week. If he bites again, he's gone. No arguments." Arya looked up, eyes red and stunned. "You mean it?" "I mean it." His gaze flicked toward Echo, who still cowered in the corner. "But you feed him. You clean him. You watch him. Understand?" She nodded, breath still shaky. Walter grumbled something under his breath and stomped toward the front door, grabbing his coat. "I'm getting firewood," he muttered. "And when I get back, you better have that blood cleaned off the floor." The door slammed shut behind him. Inside, Arya crawled toward Echo. He didn't move. She sat beside him, gently resting her hand near his paw, just close enough for him to choose. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in barely and let his head rest against her leg, just like before. She stroked the fur behind his ear. "I won't let them take you," she whispered. "You're mine now." Outside, the wind howled through the pines like distant voices returning from a past no one wanted to remember. But in the warmth of the cabin, something held, something fragile, something worth saving. The snow had deepened overnight, blanketing the world in a hush so thick it swallowed even the sounds of the wind. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low. Shadows flickered across the log walls like half-formed memories. Arya lay curled beneath the wool blanket on the old sofa, one hand resting gently on Echo's side. He was asleep, or close to it, his chest rising in soft, uneven breaths, his bandaged leg twitching slightly. The room smelled of pine smoke, iodine, and the quiet breath of healing. But somewhere past midnight, the silence broke. At first, it was a soft, almost inaudible whimper, barely louder than the crackle of the hearth. Then it grew, a low, resonant howl that seemed to rise not from Echo's throat but from somewhere deeper, older, a sound that didn't quite belong to any one animal. It wasn't angry, it wasn't sad, it was calling. Arya sat up, the blanket falling to her waist. Echo had shifted to a seated position, nose pointed toward the floorboards, body stiff. The howl came again, longer this time, rhythmic, like a chant passed between generations of wolves. It echoed beneath them. Walter burst through the bedroom door, half-dressed and wide-eyed. His rifle wasn't in his hands, but his old ranger instincts lived in his posture. "What the hell was that?" he rasped. Arya didn't answer. She was staring at Echo like she didn't quite recognize him. Echo suddenly stopped howling. He looked around the room as if waking from a trance, ears twitching, breath shallow, eyes distant. Then he lay back down, resting his chin on his paws like nothing had happened. Walter stepped cautiously toward the center of the room, listening. Silence again. Just the fire. Just the wind. Just the creak of old wood under the weight of the storm. "You heard that, didn't you?" Arya whispered. Walter didn't respond. Instead, he crossed to the wooden cabinet in the corner and pulled it open. From behind a stack of oil lanterns and maps, he retrieved a battered, leather-bound notebook. He blew the dust off the cover. The initials, WLH, were carved faintly on the edge. Walter sat at the dining table, flipping through pages filled with tight, precise handwriting. Arya stood behind him, silent, as if afraid to break the spell. Most of the entries were routine. Elk migration notes, snowfall reports, bear sightings near the ridge. But then came a shift. A page marked with a faint smear of ash and the heading, Zone 6, Perimeter Disturbances. Walter read aloud, voice low. January 4th. Early Mineral Survey Team reported anomaly. Magnetometers spiked at the western ridge. No corresponding ore body confirmed. Unmarked drone sighted above tree line. Soundless. No lights. He flipped the page. January 8th. Echoes underground near Hollow Creek. Not seismic. Measured pulse-like frequency. Something not right. Arya glanced at the dog beside her. "Echo," she murmured. Walter looked up. "That was the name of the last entry, too," he said, eyes narrowing. "I never made the connection. I thought it meant echo-like sound waves." Arya's hand drifted toward Echo's back. He didn't flinch. "What if he's not just any dog?" she asked softly. Walter didn't scoff. Not this time. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed a hand across his tired face. "I worked 30 years in this forest," he said. "I know the way it breathes, the way it hides things. But that howl?" He glanced toward the floorboards, toward the shadows between the cracks. "That came from somewhere older than this cabin." Outside, the snow thickened. Trees bowed beneath the weight. Somewhere deep in the woods, a branch snapped loud and clean, like a bone breaking under ice. Walter stood and closed the notebook. He placed it on the shelf behind the radio he never used anymore. Not since the last time he'd reported something and been told to let it go. Arya didn't move. She stared into the fire, her thoughts racing faster than her heart. "Why would someone fly drones out here?" she asked. "Why would they care about rocks?" Walter hesitated. "They wouldn't." "Then what's under Zone 6? He didn't answer, because he wasn't sure anymore. Maybe it wasn't what was under the forest that mattered. Maybe it was what was waking up in it. Echo gave a soft bark, more a breath than a sound, and nudged his nose against Arya's knee. She bent down, resting her forehead against his. "You heard something, didn't you?" she whispered. The dog didn't move, but in his silence, something pulsed. A knowing, a warning, and a promise that whatever lived beneath this land, Echo had heard it before, and it was calling again. Morning in the cabin came with silence and frost, the kind of hush that settled between trees when even the wind held its breath. Arya sat on the snow-packed slope behind the cabin, boots half buried, a wool scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck. Her breath came out in small clouds, fading before they rose. Echo sat 10 feet in front of her, still, watching. His eyes locked on hers, not threatening, not wary, just waiting. They'd been like that for nearly a minute. No movement, no sound, no command. Arya blinked first. "Okay," she whispered, mostly to herself. "Let's try it." She raised her hand the way she remembered from that documentary about police canines, fingers flat, palm facing down, slow downward motion. "Sit," she said quietly. Echo sat. No hesitation, no lag, just immediate obedience, like a muscle twitch or memory firing behind the eyes. Arya's heart stuttered in her chest. She tried again. This time she lifted her hand and made a circular motion with her index finger. "Turn." Echo pivoted once, tail still and low. Her breath caught. That wasn't luck. She swallowed, unsure if she should keep going. But something deeper than fear, deeper even than grief, had settled inside her. A pull, a dare. She knelt on the snow, brushing her glove against the icy surface until her finger found a stick. Using the end, she drew a quick line in the snow, then tapped the stick twice on her thigh. Echo's ears perked. 2 taps. He walked forward and stopped exactly at the line. Arya felt her throat tighten. She tapped 3 times. Echo sat. 4 taps. He lay down. "What are you?" she whispered. Echo tilted his head, not confused, listening. It wasn't just obedience, it was anticipation. As if he wasn't being trained, but remembered something he'd been taught long ago. Arya sat back, legs sprawled, snow soaking through the hem of her jeans. She stared at Echo for a long moment before speaking again. "You were trained for something." Echo didn't move. "You're not just smart. You know codes. You know hand signs. You didn't learn that from me." She paused. "And you trust me." It wasn't a question. It was the one truth she could feel all the way down to the marrow. Since that night in the woods, something between them had aligned. Not the kind of trust you built in days. The kind that came from being found when no one else was looking. From recognizing pain that matched your own. She stood, brushing snow from her coat. Then, without thinking, she pointed 2 fingers forward and snapped her wrist back. It was a command she had no name for, something she remembered from the video where a military dog disarmed an attacker. Echo froze, then moved, silent, swift. He lunged forward, stopped just short of her arm, and raised one paw gently against her sleeve. No teeth, no aggression, just precision. Then he backed away and sat. Arya stared, stunned. "You're a ghost," she murmured. "Someone trained you to disappear." Behind her, the back door creaked open. Walter leaned against the frame, holding a chipped coffee mug, his face unreadable beneath the furrow of his brow. "I've seen that move," he said. "That's not police work." Arya turned. Walter stepped out into the snow, boots crunching. "That's special operations. Government stuff. Black zone." "How do you know?" He hesitated. "Because I used to log reports for Border Patrol cross-training drills," he said. "I've seen K9 units do things that don't make it to public footage. Code taps. Thermal ghosting. Dead ground silence. That stuff doesn't go to your average precinct." Arya didn't reply. She looked back at Echo, who was now lying in the snow, tongue lolling like any normal dog. But his eyes never left hers. "He listens to you," Walter said after a pause. "I didn't teach him anything," Arya said quietly. Walter looked at her a moment longer. "Maybe you didn't have to." They stood there, three shadows beneath the winter sun. An old man, a silent girl, and a dog who didn't belong to the world anymore. Not really. That afternoon, Arya wrote in her old sketchpad, not drawings, just scribbled commands and signals, testing what Echo already knew. Every pattern she tried, he matched. If she tapped once, then twice, then paused, he would rise, step back, and turn in a tight half-circle. If she whispered, barely a sound, "Cover me," he would move to stand beside her, pressed close, eyes scanning the horizon. He wasn't responding like a pet. He was activating like a soldier. Each test peeled away a layer of mystery and built a new one in its place. That night, Echo slept at the foot of Arya's bed. He didn't move, not even when the coyotes cried in the valley, or the floorboards creaked beneath Walter's slow, heavy steps. And sometime before dawn, when the moon dipped low and the wind shifted over the ridge, Arya whispered a single word into the dark. "Stay." Echo didn't stir. But in his stillness, she felt something anchor, as if the world just for now was holding still, together. The stream hadn't frozen yet. It curled like a silver ribbon at the base of the ravine, whispering beneath a canopy of hoar-frost-laced pines. Arya crouched near its edge, gloved hands gathering smooth stones from beneath a thin film of ice. The air was sharp with the scent of snow and cedar bark. Winter was settling in early this year. Echo stood at a distance, still limping faintly on his back leg, but alert, watchful. The sled lay behind them, propped against a fallen log with the bundle of firewood they'd gathered. It was supposed to be a short walk, just enough to stretch their limbs and break cabin fever before the storm returned. But something shifted. It was Echo who noticed it first. He stiffened ears forward, nose twitching. Arya turned. "What is it?" she whispered. No sound, no wind, just stillness, too complete to be natural. Echo took a step forward, lips curling back slow, silent, primal. That's when Arya heard it. A low thump in the underbrush behind her, not the sound of branches falling, heavier, measured. Then she saw the eyes. Amber, fixed, unblinking, half hidden behind the gnarled roots of a spruce tree. Mountain lion. Bigger than she'd imagined, lean, taut muscle and hunger draped in tawny fur. It didn't snarl. It didn't roar. It watched. Predators didn't need to announce themselves. Arya froze. She could feel her pulse slamming against the inside of her throat, her breath caught, every instinct in her body telling her to run. But Echo was already moving. He darted in front of her, body low, stance wide despite the limp. A growl rumbled from his chest, low, almost vibrating through the snow beneath her boots. "Echo," she whispered. "No, don't." The mountain lion stepped forward, silent as mist. Echo didn't wait. He lunged. The collision was a blur of muscle and sound fur against fur, snow flying in a halo around them. The cougar reared, swiping a massive paw across Echo's shoulder. Blood streaked the white ground. But Echo didn't fall. He snapped with precision, catching the cat just below the throat enough to startle, not kill. The lion recoiled, twisting, hissing. Arya stumbled backward, landing hard against the sled. From the ridge above, a gunshot cracked the silence. Not a warning shot. A deliberate one aimed wide enough to scare. The cougar paused, then turned with a low snarl and vanished into the trees, tail whipping like a banner of retreat. Arya's breath returned in a broken sob. She turned. Walter was there, rifle lowered, face pale. He slid down the ridge like he had a decade earlier in ranger boots, knees bending hard at the base of the slope. "You okay?" he shouted. She nodded, too shaken to speak. Walter's eyes dropped to Echo. The dog stood bloody and trembling, but standing. His body swayed slightly, chest heaving. A dark streak of crimson trickled down his leg, already clotting in the cold. Walter stared. "I saw it," he murmured, stepping closer. He shielded her." His voice cracked, not from emotion, from disbelief. Echo turned his head toward Arya, just a glance, just long enough to confirm she was alive. Then he sat down hard. Arya scrambled forward on hands and knees, slipping through ice, and dropped beside him. Her hands fluttered uselessly near the wound. "You stupid, stupid dog," she whispered. "Why'd you do that?" Echo leaned his weight against her side, trembling. Walter knelt beside them. "Let me see." She hesitated. But then she nodded, and Walter placed his rifle in the snow and examined the gash. "Deep," he muttered, "but no artery. He's lucky." He looked at the collar again. Canine 72 Echo. The designation no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a warning. This dog had been trained to take down something far worse than mountain lions, and had survived it. Walter didn't speak for a while. Then quietly, he said, "We need to get him home." Together, they lifted Echo onto the sled, Walter gripping the front, Arya steadying the back with mittened hands. It took half an hour to get back to the cabin, their legs burning, snow soaking through their boots. The wind picked up again, cruel and biting, but no one spoke. The weight of what just happened clung to them like fog. Inside, Walter cleared the table while Arya fetched towels and antiseptic. They didn't argue, didn't bicker, just moved in rhythm, three souls, bound by the same moment. Echo lay still as Arya cleaned the blood away, his breath shallow but steady. Walter watched her, something unreadable flickering across his weathered face. He'd seen dogs like this before, long ago, in files stamped confidential, in after-action reports buried under red tape. But he'd never met one, not like this. Not one that would throw himself between a mountain lion and a child without a second thought. He watched Arya as she cradled Echo's head, whispering something so softly it could have been prayer. Her voice, unused for so long, now flowing freely gentle, coaxing, full of something tender and raw. When Echo finally drifted into sleep, she looked up at Walter. Her cheeks were damp. "He saved me," she said. Walter nodded. "I saw." The storm rolled in slow that night, veiling the treetops in ice mist and wind. Beyond the windows, snowflakes danced under the porch light like ghost ash, weightless and uninvited. Inside, the cabin was quieter than usual. Arya had fallen asleep beside Echo, her fingers still curled in the dog's fur, like a child clutching the edge of a dream. Walter stood in the hallway, watching them for a long while. The fire cracked softly behind him, casting his shadow against the floorboards. Tall, slightly hunched, like the shape of a man trying to remember how to stand upright. He walked into the kitchen and pulled open the drawer he rarely touched. It stuck a little. Always did. Inside, beneath the loose batteries and rusted keys, was a bundle wrapped in a handkerchief, old and yellowed, smelling faintly of tobacco and cedar. He sat down, slowly, unfolded the cloth. There they were, letters, 15, maybe 20, all in his handwriting, all unsigned, all addressed to the same man, Nathaniel Callahan, his son, Aria's father. Walter stared at the top one, eyes tracing the indentations where his pen had pressed harder, like he'd been trying to push warning into paper. "You need to let it go, Nate. Hale doesn't play fair, and he doesn't play legal. He'll bury you in permits and bribes before he ever lifts a finger. This land isn't just dirt, it's cover. You're walking into something too wide for either of us to see clear." Walter exhaled slowly. The words had never been mailed, not because he didn't want to warn him, but because deep down he knew it wouldn't stop Nathaniel. His son was always chasing something just out of reach, like Aria. He thumbed to the next letter, written shakier, the ink slightly smeared. "I told you about Zone 6 for a reason. The mineral readings were never normal. I filed those reports. They disappeared. A week later, Vincent Hale sent a representative to offer me a consulting deal. When I declined, my ranger credentials were pulled. Quietly. No noise. Just gone." He paused, jaw tight. How long had it been since he allowed himself to feel the betrayal? Not from Hale, but from the system that let him vanish without a trace of wrongdoing because he got too close to a truth they didn't want surfaced. He shuffled to the last unfinished draft, the one with the tear in the margin where he'd crumpled it halfway through. "Nate, if you dig any deeper, they'll find a way to shut you up. I don't know what's under that ridge Hale keeps circling with his drones, but I know it's not condos. This isn't about ecotourism anymore. It never was." He set the paper down. His hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from the memory of how right he'd been. Nathaniel had died 3 months later. Car accident, they said. Single vehicle. Black ice. But Walter had hiked those roads 1,000 times, knew every bend, every slope, knew where black ice formed and where it didn't. No one ever asked him. He didn't offer. Instead, he buried the letters in the drawer and buried his grief under routine. Took in Aria, not because he was ready, but because there was no one else. And now she was out there, whispering to a half-dead dog with military signals in its bones and ghosts in its eyes. Walter folded the letters again, slower this time. When he looked up, he saw the map pinned to the far wall, the one faded by sunlight and half covered in post-it notes and pencil scratches. Zone 6. The same area Echo had howled toward. The same ridge where mineral readings had once spiked, then disappeared from government logs. He stood, crossed the room. His finger hovered over the ridge, then pressed it like a wound he wasn't ready to reopen. Hale hadn't been seen publicly in years, not around these parts anyway. But the land survey still came, quiet, corporate, masked under fake names and false permits. Aria's father had tried to stop it. Now Aria had found something else. Something they might have lost. A dog that wasn't just a dog. Walter turned and looked down the hallway, where the firelight flickered gently on the doorframe of Aria's room. He could hear her breathing, hear Echo's soft exhale beside her. The cabin, for a brief moment, felt like it had blood in its walls again. But beneath that, something colder stirred. He reached for the radio, not to call for help, but to listen, to static, to silence, to see if the frequency he used to report Zone 6 data was still blocked. He turned the dial slowly. A hum, then a pulse, then nothing, just snow in the line. But that nothing sounded a little too clean. He shut the radio off, and for the first time in years, he unlocked the cabinet near the hearth and pulled out his old ranger badge. He held it in his hand like it weighed more now. Maybe it did. Outside, the wind picked up. The trees whispered again. But this time they didn't sound empty. They sounded like they were remembering. The knock came just after noon, 3 sharp raps, precise. Not like the hesitant shuffle of a neighbor or the heavy thud of a ranger boot. This one had rhythm, intent. Walter looked up from the hearth, his hands still dusted with ash from cleaning out the stove. Arya paused mid-step in the hallway, one socked foot hovering over the rug. Echo, resting beside the fire, lifted his head, then growled low, guttural, barely audible. But it was there. Walter opened the door slowly, half expecting some lost hiker blown off trail by the winds, or one of Hale's new land surveyors waving a clipboard and a fake smile. Instead, a young man stood on the porch. Late 20s, trim coat, polished boots, neatly cropped dark hair, and glasses that gleamed even in the soft light. He smiled like he'd been rehearsing. "Walter Callahan?" the man said. "Who's askin'?" "I'm Noah Langley." He reached into his coat slowly, carefully producing a faded envelope. "Arya's cousin, on her mother's side." Walter took the envelope. The handwriting on the front was familiar. Grace's sister, Madeline. A note dated months ago, never forwarded. Arya hadn't moved from the hallway. Noah glanced past Walter, eyes landing on her with practiced softness. "Hi, Arya," he said, voice gentle. "You probably don't remember me. I saw you last at the lake house years ago. You were building sand castles with a dog named Pippin." She didn't answer. Didn't even nod. But her hand went instinctively to the edge of the wall, bracing, measuring. Echo had risen silently and stood between her and the doorway. Body still, eyes locked on the visitor. Noah's smile wavered for the briefest moment, then returned. "I brought some things for her. Books, sweets. Madeline always said Arya loved strawberry licorice." Walter stepped aside enough to let him in, but only just. The cabin felt smaller with Noah inside, like his presence displaced more than air. He set the cloth bag down on the table gently, like he was laying out something sacred. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come," he said. "After the accident, I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome. Family history and all that." Walter didn't respond. Arya stood her ground, eyes darting between Noah and the door, her fingers curled tighter against the wood. Echo hadn't blinked. "I'm working in logistics now," Noah continued, unbothered. "Data infrastructure, smart sensors, remote comms. Nothing glamorous, but it pays." He said it like it explained something, like it excused his arrival. "I figured I'd take a few days, reconnect, maybe help around the place. Grace always spoke fondly of you, Walter." Walter grunted. Grace spoke fondly of a lot of people. Didn't mean she trusted 'em. A flicker passed through Noah's eyes, too quick to name. Then he chuckled. "Fair enough." He reached into the bag and pulled out a hardcover book with a hand-stitched spine. A children's folk tale collection. Scandinavian. Worn, but clean. "For Arya," he said, holding it out. Arya didn't take it. She didn't even look at it. Instead, her voice came quiet, unused, but unmistakable. "Echo doesn't like you." It was the first time she'd spoken in front of someone new. Noah blinked. then forced a smile. Dogs can be territorial. Walter watched closely. That smile had too many teeth. Echo hadn't growled again, but his body was taut, leaning forward a fraction, as if awaiting a signal no one else could hear. Noah set the book down. "I'll stay in town tonight. There's a lodge near the main road. I just wanted to introduce myself and pay my respects." He gestured gently toward the framed photo above the mantel, Nathaniel and Grace, smiling in a rare sunlit moment, Arya a blur of motion between them. "I wish I'd come sooner," he said. No one answered. He buttoned his coat, still moving slowly, measured. As he stepped toward the door, Echo moved to follow, matching pace like a shadow with teeth. "No sudden moves," Walter muttered. "He don't bark unless he means it." Noah paused at the threshold. Snow was falling again outside, fine, dry flakes like salt shaken from a too heavy hand. He turned once more to Arya. "If you ever want to talk," he said, "I'm not far." Then he stepped into the cold. The door shut behind him with a finality that seemed to echo through the beams. Walter waited until the footsteps had faded down the hill before speaking. "Cousin, huh?" Arya shrugged. Echo padded back to her side. She knelt and buried her fingers into the thick fur behind his ear. "He lied about the sand castle," she whispered. "That was in Oregon, with my dad, not the lake house." Walter looked down at her, surprised. She didn't look back, just kept petting Echo, who now rested his chin on her knee. Outside, the wind picked up again, and in the silence that followed, it wasn't just the trees that were listening. The snow had softened that morning, melting just enough to leave behind a slick crust that crunched underfoot. Walter noticed at first faint boot prints near the old ranger office. Not his, not Arya's. They circled wide from the front porch, looped behind the woodshed, and ended near the cellar's outer door. The padlock hung crooked, still shut but scraped, as if someone had tried it and failed, then didn't bother hiding the attempt. He squinted at the tracks, jaw tightening. Noah had said he went for a walk before breakfast. "Clearing my head," he'd called it, rubbing his temples with the air of a city man allergic to stillness. But Walter knew this forest. No one cleared their head by trudging straight to a cellar sealed since 1996. Inside the ranger office, the smell of cedar and old ink lingered. The logbooks were still lined up on the shelf, untouched for years until now. The third ledger was misfiled, pulled slightly forward. Walter opened it. Page 117 had a bent corner. His own handwriting stared back at him. Zone 6. Irregular EM pulses detected at Northern Ridge. Reported to HQ. No follow-up. A note in the margin read, "Surveyors grounded due to unconfirmed airspace anomaly. Hale insisted it was atmospheric noise." Unconvinced. He shut the book. Noah had no business reading that. Back at the cabin, Arya helped restock firewood, Echo trailing behind her like a shadow with breath. She'd started humming again, quiet, unsteady melodies that disappeared the moment she noticed someone listening. Walter watched her from the porch, then turned toward the slope leading to the ridge. The trees whispered, as they always did, when something went wrong. That night, clouds rolled low, pressing their weight into the cabin roof. The radio crackled in short bursts, weather updates, emergency codes, then static. Noah retired early, citing fatigue. But around midnight, the floor creaked. Walter wasn't asleep. He stepped silently down the hall, pausing at the edge of the living room. Moonlight spilled across the floorboards, just enough to see movement. Noah, standing by the window. He wasn't looking out. He was speaking, barely above a whisper, into a sleek black device, no bigger than a deck of cards. A satellite phone, high-end, military grade. "No, nothing yet," Noah murmured. "The old man's sharp, though. I'll need to move faster. No, the signal's too weak this deep in. Might have to relocate." "Yes, her too." "Her too?" Walter leaned against the frame just enough to make the plank creak again, louder this time. Noah froze, turned, and smiled too quickly. "Can't sleep," he said, slipping the phone into his jacket pocket like a magician hiding a card. "Didn't mean to wake you." "Didn't," Walter said flatly. They stood there in silence, snow ticking softly against the windows. "Was just trying to get reception. My boss keeps hounding me, even out here." Walter raised a brow. "Didn't know logistics paid enough for private satellites." Noah's smile thinned. "It's just a rental. I'll be gone soon anyway." He turned and padded back to the guest room like nothing had happened. But something had. Arya noticed it too. The next day she found Echo standing rigid at the edge of the trees behind the cabin, ears perked forward. When she followed his gaze, she saw Noah again, just past the tree line, crouched by the old marker stone Walter once called the post that shouldn't be moved. He was digging with his hands. When he looked up and saw her, he didn't wave, just stood and brushed snow from his knees, mumbling something about stretching his legs. But his eyes were wrong, too calm, too careful. That night, Arya lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Echo slept curled beside her, one ear always twitching toward the door. The world outside the window felt too still, like a breath being held. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the book Noah had brought her. She hadn't opened it before. Now she did. Inside the cover, there was a card, embossed with a silver emblem. Helix Terra Analytics. Beneath it, data solutions for a changing world, and on the back scrawled in rushed angular script coordinates. Arya didn't understand them. Not fully, but she knew this much. They didn't point to any town. They pointed to something else, something hidden. Something Echo had been trying to tell her all along. She set the book down and curled into Echo's fur. "Stay close," she whispered. He already was. It started with a thud. Not the heavy kind that echoed like warning, but soft wood on wood, shelf against plaster. Arya had been dusting the cramped corner of the study, where Walter kept old ranger manuals, yellowed seed catalogs, and a pair of broken binoculars that hadn't worked in years. She tugged at a sagging shelf to straighten it, and something slipped free behind it. A rolled piece of oilskin parchment, brittle at the edges, taped shut with electrical tape long gone brittle with age. Arya knelt, peeled it open on the floor. A map, topographic, hand-marked, familiar terrain, the ridge lines above the North Gorge, the winding curves of frozen Hollow Creek. But it was what wasn't printed that caught her breath. Someone, maybe her father, had drawn in paths that weren't part of any official chart. Veins of trails leading nowhere, dead ends that curved back like loops made by cautious feet. And then, in red ink, smeared slightly by time, mine site, confirm with Charlie, deck 18. High manganese, possible rare earths. A circle thick, almost carved into the paper around a stretch just west of Zone 6. Her throat tightened. Her fingers brushed another note near the margin. This one in different handwriting. Sharper, more rushed. Do not report to Hale until tested independently. She sat back against the bookshelf, the cold of the floor seeping through her spine. The name Charlie itched something loose in her memory. A man from her father's stories. A geologist, maybe. Friend? Colleague? She couldn't tell. But she knew this much. It wasn't fiction. And someone had wanted to keep it buried. She found Walter outside, sharpening an axe. The wind was picking up again, chasing needles of snow into his coat collar. "Were you going to tell me?" Her voice was steady, but only barely. He looked up slowly. Arya held the map out with both hands, her scarf slipping from her shoulder. "You knew." He said nothing at first, just stared at the map like it was a ghost rising out of old earth. Then he stood. "Come inside," he said. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting orange flickers across the cabin walls. Walter moved slowly, as if age had finally caught up with the weight of what he'd been carrying. He didn't sit, didn't look at her. "Your parents weren't just hiking that day," he said. "They were following coordinates. They thought they'd found something big, not gold or silver, something rarer. Industrial grade used in tech, satellites, defense contracts." "Rare earths," Arya whispered. He nodded. "They didn't trust Hale, not after the zoning permits went missing. They planned to send samples to someone they trusted, Charlie Liu. Independent geologist, ex-NASA contractor, smart, careful." And then, Walter swallowed. Then the call went dead. He moved to the mantel, pulled out a weathered envelope tucked behind a stack of firewood permits. Inside were 2 photos, grainy, taken from a drone or plane. They showed the same ridge, before and after a rock slide. "They were found 3 days later," Walter continued, "crushed under a fallen shelf. Official report said weather caused it. Sudden thaw." "But you don't believe that." His eyes lifted to hers, tired, hollow. "No," he said, "I never did." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because telling you meant saying it out loud," Walter said. "That maybe it wasn't an accident, that someone silenced them because of what they found. And I wasn't brave enough to carry that weight. Not for you." Arya's eyes burned, but she didn't look away. "They died for this." Walter nodded slowly. "That land was never zoned for mining," he said. "But Hale, he's always had plans. And influence. There were reports of unauthorized flights over Zone 6. Equipment shipments mislabeled as logging gear, but without proof, without Charlie's samples, there was nothing to stand on." Arya looked down at the map in her hands, her father's handwriting, looped and hopeful. They'd believed in something, enough to risk everything. Echoes stirred beside the hearth, sensing the shift in her heartbeat, her breath. "Then we find the site," Arya said, softly but without hesitation. "We find what they found." Walter looked at her. This time he didn't try to stop her. The room smelled like cedar and cold ambition, not just from the wood-paneled walls, but from the man behind the desk. Vincent Hale, impeccably dressed, snowless boots despite the blizzard outside. He didn't look up when Noah Langley entered, only circled a red ring on a map. "You recognize this?" Hale asked. Noah nodded. "It's their handwriting." "Then you know where they might have stored the samples, or worse, the data." Noah hesitated. He didn't know exact coordinates, but he knew enough. Arya's father never trusted Hale, and for good reason. "They didn't trust you," Noah said carefully. "They were naive?" Hale replied. "This isn't about right or wrong. It's about who controls the board before the government locks it all down. I own most of the valley, but not that ridge. Not yet." Walter's still holding out. Hale stepped closer. "Your family. That gives you access I can't buy. I don't need lies, just retrieval. Quietly. before February." He handed Noah an envelope. Inside, travel funds, locations, and details. "She's there too, right? The girl?" Noah didn't answer. Yes, Arya was there. Grief wrapped around her like armor, and Echo never left her side. "You liked her, Mother," Hale said, softly but sharp. The words stung. Helena had been brilliant, fiery, kind. Years ago, she believed in Noah before he believed in himself. "She believed in protecting the land," Noah said. "And now she's gone," Hale replied, "and the girl won't speak." Noah clenched his fists, but Hale had already moved on. "You have until January. After that, the bulldozers don't wait." Weeks later, snow fell like static against the windows of Walter's cabin. Noah stood by the cellar door, listening to the wind and the silence inside. He hadn't called Hale, not really, just hovered over the send button, hesitating. Echo had growled at him again that night. Arya hadn't said anything, but she was watching. Noah remembered Helena's voice, once full of warmth. "Don't let someone else write your compass." Now, he wasn't sure where north was. Later, he tried a softer approach. "Hey, Arya," he said, offering a small gift box. "Thought you'd like this." Inside was a drawing kit, exactly the kind Helena would have bought. Arya looked at it. "Thanks," she said flatly. Fishing, he asked, "Where does Echo sleep? Must be trained, right?" She paused. "He sleeps where he wants." "Sure, but maybe a blanket? The old office?" She blinked. "He likes the roof. Says the stars talk less than people." A lie. Delivered clean. Noah laughed nervously, but Arya didn't smile. She walked away toward Echo. Inside the back room, she dropped beside him, still clutching the gift. "He asked about you," she whispered. "Not me. You." Echo sniffed the box, then looked away. "You growled at him last night," she added. He didn't deny it. She stared into his eyes. "Why don't you like him?" The answer was silent. A look, a warning. And in her chest, something clicked. Noah had shown up too conveniently, too prepared, too careful, and always asking the wrong questions. That night she didn't sleep. Instead, she slipped from bed and pulled out the old map hidden behind Walter's books. The same red circles. Zone 6. The ridge. She whispered, "I think Noah's here for this." Echo stood, silent, ready. It was enough. Morning brought deeper snow. Walter sat alone in the ranger office, the wood stove unlit, the map spread beside an old photo, him and Elias, young, full of hope. Then boots crunched outside. The door opened. Noah entered, polite smile in place, holding a tin of coffee like a peace offering. "You're up early?" he said. Walter didn't reply. They sat in silence until Walter broke it. "I've seen a lot of liars. Most don't wear boots that cost more than my truck." Noah blinked. "I've seen you with the sat phone, snooping around the cellar, whispering to ghosts. You think I don't notice when someone's looking for what isn't theirs?" "I'm here for Arya," Noah said. "Family. She lost her parents in a fire that doesn't add up. And you show up asking about the dog?" Walter pointed at the map. "She found this. The same one I told her father not to give Hale." Noah's expression hardened. "You've got it all wrong." Walter stood. "I don't know what Hale promised you, but I've buried better men than him in these woods." He turned to the old analog radio and called out, "Ranger base to Unit Sierra 9, Granite Hollow, come in." Static. Noah stepped forward. "Walter, let's not. You made it bigger the second you walked in with a lie." Outside, Arya and Echo were near the old woodshed. Echo had been circling for an hour, digging. Now he was still, nose pointed at something beneath the snow. Arya dropped to her knees and uncovered a rusted tin box. Echo sat beside it, silent, guarding. Back inside, the radio finally crackled. "Copy that, Walter. Ranger Myers. What's going on?" Walter's voice was firm. "Need a quiet visit. No local chatter. I've got something tied to Hale's old claims. Might link to Elias and his death." A pause. "Understood. ETA 4 hours. Off the grid. You got backup?" Walter looked at the door. Noah stood there still, watching. Walter didn't flinch. "Yeah," he said. "I've got backup." Noah turned and walked out. But the silence he left behind wasn't relief. It was the kind that comes right before the avalanche. The tin box was heavier than Arya expected. She cradled it in both hands as the wind whispered through the trees. Echo stood beside her, still and tense. His breath fogged in the cold, his eyes never dropping from alert. Walter stepped out of the cabin as she brought the box to the porch. His face tightened. "You found that where?" Echo dug it up, behind the woodshed. Walter opened the door without another word. "Inside, quick." At the kitchen table, Walter used a crowbar to pry the box open. Inside, a notebook sealed in plastic, a black USB drive in a waterproof sleeve, and 3 folded geological maps marked with red circles. The handwriting was familiar. Elias Monroe, her father. The notebook's cover read, "For Arya, if I can't get to you in time." Inside were maps and a letter part log, part confession. "It's not just a boundary issue. There's something under Echo Ridge. Rare earths, maybe heavier. But it's about more than the land, it's about control. If you're reading this, I couldn't protect it or you in time. Don't trust anyone until you reach Charlie. Trust Echo. He remembers more than you think." Walter noticed the recorder taped to the lid. Arya clicked it on. Her father's voice spilled out, rushed, grainy. "Elias Monroe, 4 days before the Bureau call. Hale sent a man, said it was about permits. Recon, I think. If I'm gone, Hale knew. Tell Arya I tried." Silence followed. Then Walter spoke. "So that's why they died." He examined the maps, shaking his head. "Damn it, Elias, you buried this right under our noses." Arya studied the USB. "If this has the mineral data, it proves the discovery. The motive. Maybe even who's involved." Walter nodded, grim. "Getting it to someone who'll act? That's another storm." Echo growled softly, not a warning, more like a nudge. "Where's Noah?" Walter asked. Arya looked outside. The path to the shed was empty. "He wasn't in the cabin when I came back." Walter grabbed the radio and sent a call to Ranger Base. "This is Walter Ward. We have high-value documents tied to the Monroe case. Immediate risk of sabotage. Requesting airlift to Echo Ridge checkpoint." Response: "Copy that. 4 hours out. Stay low." Walter turned to her. "You need to get to that ridge. It's the last breadcrumb, and whatever's up there, it's big enough to get people killed." Arya zipped the notebook and USB into her pack. "I'm not running," she said. Echo waited outside, already facing the north, the ridge, the truth, whatever waited in the cold. Later, by the fire, Arya sat alone, Echo dozed near the hearth. She flipped through the notebook again, coordinates, mineral data, mentions of hail in coded shorthand. Then something slipped out from the back, a folded sketch on thick paper, edges stained with time. It was her mother's hand-delicate pencil strokes of Echo Ridge under an open sky. But hidden in the shading, beneath the ridge's southern slope, was a shape. A wolf's head, sloped muzzle, pointed ears. Beneath it, her mother had written, "What howls beneath the mountain cannot be caged." It wasn't just art. It was code, a guide. The shape on the sketch matched the red circle on her father's map's vein density 93.7. Her father saw it with science, her mother with instinct. Arya traced the wolf with trembling fingers. Somewhere inside that shape buried in the mountain was the truth. Echo stirred, walked to her side, and nudged her arm. "Did you go there with them?" she whispered. Echo held her gaze, then walked to the door, waiting. She folded the drawing, tucked it in her bag. Her mother once said, "The land speaks if you know how to listen." Arya was ready now, but just past midnight the silence broke. A creak. Wrong. Echo stood, alert. Arya, still asleep on the couch, didn't wake. Echo padded down the hallway. The cellar door stood ajar. Inside, Noah crouched by Walter's filing cabinet. The lockbox was open. His hands moved fast, like he knew exactly what to take. He didn't hear the growl until it rumbled low and firm behind him. Noah froze. "Easy, boy," he said, trying fake calm. Echo stepped forward, hackles up. One step. Another. Noah backed toward the exit, but Echo blocked the path. Then, "Drop it." Walter's voice, rifle in hand, at the top of the stairs. "I knew you didn't come for Arya," Walter said. "You're wrong," Noah said too quickly. Walter stepped down. "You came for the files. Hale sent you." Noah didn't answer, but the two-way radio crackled. "Status, Langley, do you have the data?" Hale's voice, cold, clipped, confirming everything. Walter tightened his grip. Noah lunged. He shoved the cabinet down the stairs. It crashed. Walter fired, but missed. Arya jerked awake at the shot. Echo leapt. Noah and Echo collided. The USB skittered across the floor. Noah screamed, hitting Echo hard. It gave him a second. He grabbed a lantern, threw it. Glass shattered. Fire caught on a curtain. Smoke curled. Noah shoved Walter into the wall. Something cracked. Walter fell, groaning. Then Noah fled. The door slammed shut. Arya ran into the hallway. Smoke. Echo's breath ragged. Walter slumped, clutching his side. "Grandpa!" "I'm okay," he gasped. "Ribs gone, but I've had worse." Arya grabbed a towel, smothered the fire. Documents safe. But Noah was gone. No doubt anymore. The enemy wasn't coming. He was already here. The storm arrived without warning, sudden, furious, like it had waited for the worst possible moment. By morning, the world was buried, not postcard white, but brutal and consuming. Wind howled across Echo Ridge like a beast unchained, slamming the old cabin with clawed fists of ice. Snow swallowed the porch, erased the trail. The sky was hollow, colorless. Arya twisted the radio dial again. Static, just static. "Noah cut the tower," Walter rasped from the couch, voice paper thin, or it froze. "Either way, we're alone." She didn't answer. Her hands moved fast, but fear tightened her chest. Walter looked worse under lamplight gray beneath the bruises, breath shallow. Fever soaked his shirt. He hadn't sat up all morning. Arya knelt beside him with a bowl of melted snow and a cloth. "You have to drink. Please." Echo sat nearby, alert, staring at the windows like he knew danger wouldn't knock. It would come in. Walter sipped. Eyes fluttered. "You remind me of her. Your mom. When she was scared, she just kept going." "I'm scared," Arya whispered. "I know. You're doing great anyway." The wind screamed. Something hit the roof. Ice? A branch? Echo flinched, but didn't move. Arya fed the fire with what little wood they had. She tore apart a broken chair for kindling. Echo padded in with sticks he'd pawed loose before the storm sealed them inside. The flame caught, wavering but warm. Walter's voice faded. "If I don't make it, don't!" she snapped. Then softer. "You will." He grabbed her hand. "Get the documents out. Protect Echo Ridge. It's not about the minerals. It's about what they'll do if they get it." She nodded, swallowing fear. That night, she kept vigil. Echo paced, pausing only to stare into the dark. When the wind shrieked loudest, she held Walter's old rifle tighter. Just in case Noah came back. Just in case the storm wasn't the worst of it. Before dawn, Walter began to shake. The fever surged again. She boiled snow, ground willow bark, and forced the bitter tea down his throat. He grimaced, but drank. Echo barked twice, sharp. He was staring at the shelf, the med kit. "Good boy," she whispered. Inside, buried deep, a single vial of penicillin. One syringe, still sealed. Her hands trembled. But she remembered her mother's old trail lesson. Clean, steady, slow. She injected the dose. Walter groaned, then fell into sleep. Not deep, but steadier. Echo curled beside him, breathing in rhythm with the old man. By morning, the door was iced shut. The fire dead. Arya split the last log. Just one more night, she told herself, just one more. Walter stirred. His fingers found hers. "You stayed. I'm not leaving." He closed his eyes peacefully this time. Echo pressed his nose to the frosted window, watching. The storm calmed by dawn, but left behind a silence heavier than wind. Arya was just stoking the fire when Echo froze ears, pricked, body rigid, growl low and deep. She ran to the window. Tracks. 2 sets, wide, curving in from the trees. Snowmobiles. She ducked. Echo quiet. He circled back toward the cellar, guarding instinctively. Walter stirred. "What is it? Not rangers? Not rescue?" Walter's eyes sharpened. "Hale sent them." Outside, engines died. Footsteps crunched across snow. A voice called, "Anyone home?" Another chuckled. "Cabin's warm. Maybe they'll invite us in." Arya grabbed the rifle. "Notebook, map, drive?" "In the floor. 3rd board from the stove." She pried it loose and stuffed the files beneath, heart pounding. Echo crouched over the cellar hatch like a soldier. A knock-hard metal, not friendly. "Look, we don't want trouble," the voice cooed. "Just looking for what your dad left behind. A drive, some maps. Make this easy." Silence. "You're alone now, aren't you?" Then the sound of a round being chambered. Walter tried to sit. "Don't let them take anything, not even you." "I won't." Then bang. The door exploded inward. Echo roared not a bark, but something primal. He slammed into the first man, sending him sprawling. The second raised his rifle, fired. Echo yelped, collapsed. "No!" Arya screamed. She fired back, missed, but close enough to send the second man retreating, dragging his partner. The snowmobiles screamed to life and vanished into the trees. She dropped to Echo's side. Blood stained the snow beneath his left shoulder. "Please, stay with me," she whispered, pressing cloth to the wound. Echo didn't whimper. He just looked at her, steady, trusting. Walter coughed. "Did they take anything?" "No, but they'll come back." He nodded. "Then don't wait." "Can you still walk?" she asked Echo. He shifted. Pain etched his body. But he stood, barely. By dusk, the wind returned, not a whisper, but a scream. Arya stood over the cellar, hands trembling on the hatch. Walter's breath rasped. Echo lay wrapped in gauze, alert but weak. "We can't stay," she whispered. They were out of food, out of time. She dragged an old gear hauler sled from the cellar. Frayed rope, cracked tarp. It would have to do. She bundled Walter in blankets, strapped him in. Then, gently, Echo. He leaned his head against Walter's chest, closed his eyes. She tied the knots until her fingers bled, then stepped into the storm. The world beyond the porch was white hell, but she walked anyway. Each tug of the sled felt like dragging the weight of memory. The cabin, her parents, what used to be safe. With every step, the storm tried to erase her. She refused. She followed the compass northwest, toward the old fire watch station, if the beacon still worked. If. Half a mile in, the trees disappeared. Snow glowed blue beneath her headlamp. Walter groaned in his sleep. Echo whined softly. "Just a little more," she said. "Please." The wind screamed. Her legs burned, hands frozen to the rope, her lungs choked with cold. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. The trail was gone. Only memory remained. Her father once took her this way, before everything changed. "Follow the ridge line," he'd said. "It'll always lead to shelter." And it did. Beneath a snow bluff, half buried in frost, the ranger outpost appeared dusty, splintered, but standing. She kicked the door in. Inside, silence. Cold, but shelter. She dragged the sled inside, laid Walter on an old cot, checked his pulse, faint. But there. Echo whimpered. His wound bled through. "No," she said. "Stay with me." She found a med kit in a rusted locker, rewrapped gauze, cleaned the wound, whispered words like prayers. Then she found the beacon, covered in mold, dust. She pulled the cord. It flickered, then glowed red. Signal sent. A sob escaped her. She hadn't cried when Echo was shot, or when Walter bled, but now she broke. She collapsed beside Echo, wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'm not strong like her," she whispered. "I don't know what I'm doing." Echo exhaled slowly, rested his muzzle on her hand, and in that breath she heard her mother's words. "Sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's just not leaving." The sound came just after dawn. Low, mechanical, unmistakably wrong. Snowmobiles. Arya jolted upright from the cold floor. Echo was already alert, ears up, body taut despite the bloodied bandage across his shoulder. He limped to the door, nose twitching. They were coming. She ran to Walter's cot. His fever had eased slightly, but he was still too weak. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I have to lead them away." Maybe he understood. Maybe not. She grabbed the satchel documents, notebook, the drive, everything they had nearly died for. To Echo, she said, "We're not going far, just enough." Outside, the forest waited, silent, listening. They plunged into the trees, boots crunching frozen earth. Echo moved behind her, slower now, but focused. Every few steps, he paused, scanning, remembering what it meant to be a soldier. Engines roared, then stopped. "Search the ridge. She couldn't have gone far." Echo glanced back, then pushed through a thicket of spruce. Arya followed. She remembered Walter's lessons: walk in shadows, disturb branches, not ground. She ducked beneath a log, doubled back, scraped snow behind her to cover their trail. A voice rang out, closer. "Move! Hale wants that drive!" Arya dropped flat beneath a snowbank. Fingers numb, breath shallow. Echo slipped silently into the trees. A scream. "Dog, Arga!" A thud. Silence. Echo returned, muzzle dusted with snow, and something darker. He didn't look proud, just necessary. Arya blinked. One down. They kept moving. It became a war of inches. Footsteps calculated, breath held, sound read like Morse code. Echo led her around traps, a frozen pond, a nearly invisible tripwire. He paused, growled. She spotted the thin fishing line, snipped it with a twig. Then gunfire. A rifle cracked, bark splintered inches from her shoulder. She ran. Branches tore her skin, her lungs screamed. But she ran. Echo pushed alongside her, bleeding, relentless. They reached a clearing just as a man broke through behind them. He raised a rifle. She dove. The shot split the air. Echo launched, teeth bared, body colliding midair. They tumbled in a flurry of snow. Arya grabbed a branch and swung, crack. Silence. The man didn't move. Echo stood, limping heavier. She knelt beside him. "You're okay. Almost there." She dug into her jacket, lit a flare. Red fire roared skyward, a signal. And a target. "They saw it," she breathed. "We have to split up." Echo tilted his head. "You trust me, don't you?" He didn't hesitate. Turned west, dragging a bloody scarf from the attacker's jacket in his teeth. Bait. She ran east. Snow blinded her. She stumbled, fell, crawled under a pine, buried herself in needles. Footsteps passed, then faded. She was shaking, but alive. Somewhere, Echo had bought her time. She looked at the satchel, then at the fading flare trail. "Hold on, Echo," she whispered. "I'm coming back for you." The forest was still now, too still. She crouched beneath low pine, breath sharp in her throat. The satchel pressed against her side documents, the drive, her father's truth. She could run. She should. A snow road waded past the eastern ridge, a place helicopters could land, but Walter was still back there. And Echo hadn't returned. Tears stung her cheeks, not from wind. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Being brave isn't outrunning the storm, Arya. It's walking into it, knowing you might not come back." She looked at her red-stained, mitten Echo's blood. He'd shielded her from a bullet. Walter had trusted her to lead. She stood, buried the satchel beneath pine needles, marked it with a yellow ribbon stick. Then turned west, toward danger. The wind picked up. Her scarf froze against her skin. Her legs burned, but she didn't stop, Not when the trail vanished. Not when her body begged her to turn around. She knew the land now, could read its scars. Then tracks, heavy, dragging, paw prints beside them. Echo. She dropped to her knees. Blood spotted the snow. She followed. Around a ravine, over a rise. And saw him. Collapsed just beyond the tree line, curled toward the outpost, like he'd tried to crawl the final stretch. She fell beside him. "I'm here." His eyes flickered open. His tail gave one soft thump. "You waited." She cradled his head. "We're not done." The outpost stood nearby, dark, silent. Inside, Walter lay motionless under blankets. His breath came shallow, fevered. Arya moved quickly, melted snow, repacked the wound, whispered what she could remember from Walter's training. Echo pressed against her leg as she worked. She looked at them both. No one was coming, so she would. She rewired the emergency beacon, extended the antenna, set it to pulse every 10 minutes. Snowflakes began to fall. Echo didn't growl, but he didn't relax either. She knelt beside him, resting her forehead to his. "I'm staying." And from his chest came a low rumble agreement, then sound, a distant whir, a tremble in the sky. She ran to the doorway. A black dot appeared beyond the treetops. It grew. Helicopter. She bolted inside. "They're coming!" she shouted. "Walter, they're coming!" Walter stirred, nodded once. Echo rose slowly, wobbled toward the door, ears forward. They stepped outside together. The chopper hovered above the clearing. Wind whipped snow in violent gusts. Arya struck a flare. A red blaze burst to life in her hand. "We're here!" she screamed. Figures in orange dropped down, rescuers, medics, radios crackling. "We've got a visual girl alive, second subject male, injured, K9 present." They moved fast stretchers, vitals, commands. "Are you hurt?" a medic asked. Arya shook her head. "I'm not the one you should be asking." Echo lay down, head lowered, eyes dim. The medic knelt beside him. "Through and through, right side, lucky." "He shielded me," Arya whispered. They lifted him carefully, wrapped in foil. She followed, hand on his side. In the chopper, noise roared. But her heart was louder. She clutched the satchel maps, evidence, her father's voice. "If this gets out, Hale will silence us all." Hours passed. Heat, IVs, antiseptic, headquarters downstate. Walter stabilized. "Still pale, still alive?" Echo underwent surgery. The vet, gentle and gray-haired, emerged with tired eyes. "He's tough," she said. "One of the few." That evening, Arya sat in the hallway, arms around her knees. A woman in a Forest Service uniform approached, clipboard in hand, federal badge. "We've reviewed the documents. Your father's testimony is significant." Arya swallowed. "He warned me about Hale." The woman nodded. "His name appears on backdated surveys, illegal land approvals, and a mineral reserve never disclosed to the public." The thumb drive was undeniable. It held emails, reports, wire transfers. One memo bore Hale's initials in bold. Arya stared. "Will you stop him?" The agent didn't answer right away. Then she knelt. "We already have." That night, Arya slipped into recovery. The room smelled of saline, gauze, and melted snow. Echo lay curled on a padded blanket, IV in his leg, cone on his head. But his tail wagged once, twice, when he saw her. She knelt beside him. "I told you we'd make it." His eyes blinked. She leaned in, forehead to his. She thought of the lies buried in the frost, the map shaped like a wolf, the people who'd tried to speak and paid for it, but not anymore. Now there was light. An echo wounded but breathing was part of it. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above the kennel ward. Arya lay curled on a folded blanket, one hand resting on Echo's side. His breathing, shallow but steady, rose and fell like a tide she refused to release. She hadn't moved much since they brought him in. The staff offered her a cot, hot food, but she declined. This was where she needed to be, beside him. Her face and sleep looked younger, untouched by fear. Dried blood streaked her sleeve Echo's, not hers. Her fingers twitched now and then, checking for life, and it was there. Echo had survived surgery, barely. A grazed lung, a cracked rib. Most dogs wouldn't have lived, but Echo wasn't most dogs. He endured. Across the compound, Walter lay in a medical bed, his arm wrapped in gauze. 2 investigators stood at his side. One jotted notes. The other rubbed a tired temple. "You're saying Noah came to you about Fletcher's old survey notes?" Walter nodded. "Said he was researching land law. Sounded legit. When did you suspect something off?" Walter's eyes dropped. "Not until Echo growled at him." "The dog?" one agent asked, surprised. Walter shrugged. "Dogs don't lie." The agents exchanged a look. "He claims Hale threatened him, promised to clear his brother's record." "Doesn't make him innocent," Walter said. "No, but it doesn't make him a monster either." Down the hall, Noah sat cuffed to a metal table. His eyes were bloodshot. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't ask for anything, just stared at the floor. "He said it was just paperwork," Noah whispered when questioned. "Said no one would get hurt." But people did. Noah finally looked up. There was no defiance, no hatred, just regret. A man who realized too late that the line he crossed was razor wire. "I didn't think it would go this far." "But you helped bury it." "I know." Night returned. In the kennel, Arya stirred. Echo shifted beside her. A soft grunt escaped him. "You're awake," she whispered. He raised his head weakly, eyes meeting hers. Even hurting, he did what he always had, leaned closer. "I'm still with you," his look said. Tears welled, but she didn't let them fall. She pressed her forehead to his. "You're safe now," she whispered. "We both are." Later that morning, Walter sat in a wheelchair, eyes on the thawing snow. Arya entered, still in her torn parka. "How's the dog?" he asked. "Stubborn," she said, smiling. Walter chuckled, then winced. "Figures." She sat beside him. They questioned Noah. He didn't deny anything, but he didn't celebrate it either. Walter's eyes dimmed. "Some people bend so long they forget they're bent." She nodded. "What about Hale?" "They'll come for him. He overplayed. Your father. And you exposed it. Justice wasn't fast or clean, but it showed up if you left the light on." She rested her head on his shoulder. And this time, he let her. Later the cuffs clicked shut. Hale Sinclair didn't resist as he was led down the steps of his office. The press surged, microphones stabbing the air. "Did you authorize the drilling? Did you falsify surveys? Do you deny bribing officials?" He said nothing. His silence no longer controlled the narrative. It confirmed it. Inside the courthouse, history shifted in quiet increments. A projection screen lit up. Fletcher's voice echoed through the chamber. "They think They can cut into her without consequence. But this place remembers. Echo Ridge remembers, and so do I. Walter sat in the gallery, pale but upright. Jurors leaned in. Audio revealed dates, names, Hale's shadow dealings, all captured in Fletcher's old recorder, hidden behind false bindings. No sirens, no violence. But this was war just the same, fought with files, not fists. Outside, under a storm-cleansed sky, a different reckoning gathered. Signs waved in the wind. Echo Ridge is not for sale. Justice for the forest. Protesters came from across the state, students, elders, tribal voices, and in the center stood Arya. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She held her father's journal like a baton passed down. He gave his life to protect something that couldn't speak for itself, she said quietly. It's our turn now. Cheers followed. Patrol vehicles moved in, blocking roads into the forest. Emergency injunctions were filed. The mountain was no longer alone. That night, Arya sat by the hospital window. Echo lay at her feet, still bandaged, still watchful. He hadn't left her side. Walter looked over. They'll spin it, he warned. Say your dad was unstable. You're grieving. I'm a washed-up surveyor. I know, she said. What'll you say back? She looked at Echo. I'll say we didn't come back for revenge. We came back for the truth. Walter nodded. The silence between them held weight. Mountains, memory, men who fell, and those who stood after. Downstairs, a federal agent stepped to the podium. Boxes of evidence lined the wall behind her. Hale Sinclair is charged with conspiracy, obstruction, and unlawful extraction in a protected zone. Additional charges are pending. Cameras flashed. But in the forest, something deeper shifted. The mountain exhaled. Weeks later, the school bell rang. Arya stood at the front steps, sketchbook in her arms. Whispers followed her. Some kids had seen her father's court recording. Some had seen the dog with the eyes that never looked away. In room 214, the art room, the world fell quiet. The same cracked easel, the same smell of linseed oil. She sat at her father's old desk, opened her sketchbook, and drew. Not the ridge, not the trial. She drew Echo, resting, one ear cocked, a bird perched on his nose like a joke only she would get. The lines came easy now. Her hand didn't tremble. Back in Northridge, Walter returned to ranger duty, not because he had to, because the forest had called him back. A group of kids huddled around him in puffy coats. He handed out compasses and laminated trail maps. This, he told a boy, is a whistle. Don't blow it unless you're lost or you see a bear. If you blow it just for fun, Echo might come, and he's very strict. The kids laughed. Echo huffed nearby, then returned to his post beside the station sign. A medal hung from his collar, not flashy, just a simple tag, for unwavering service in the silent moments. He hadn't barked since that night. He didn't need to. Later, the three of them, Arya, Walter, and Echo, climbed Echo Ridge. They paused at a stone slab Fletcher once called the page the sky writes on. Arya knelt, tore out the drawing of Echo, laid it gently on the stone. Echo nudged it with his nose, then lay beside her. Walter stood nearby, hands in coat pockets. Funny, he said, how sometimes the most broken things leave the clearest tracks. Arya looked up. I'm not broken. Walter smiled. No, you're just changed. She nodded. There was no going back, but there was forward. That night, on the porch, Arya leaned into Echo's fur. "You didn't just save us," she whispered. "You reminded us what silence can protect." Echo didn't move, but he didn't have to. Because some stories aren't barked, they're endured, and then they're drawn. The wind at Echo Ridge wasn't cruel anymore. It still whistled through the pines and scattered dry leaves across the stone path, but something in its tone had softened, like an old voice learning how to hum again. The crowd stood in reverent silence, their breath rising in small clouds under the pale October sun. Children clutched mittens, parents clutched cameras, and behind them stood a group of volunteers in forest green jackets, each with a rescue dog at their side. Some dogs were small and nervous, others tall and poised, but all of them had eyes that had seen something and survived it. At the center of the stone clearing, where once only wind and ruin lingered, a simple memorial stood. 2 names carved in granite. Alex and Mira Northridge. Stewards of the wild, keepers of the quiet. Arya stood beside the stone, her hand resting gently on its edge. She wore a jacket too big for her, patched with the insignia of the new program, the Echo Project. At her feet, Echo sat proudly, healed now, but still carrying the faintest limp, a quiet reminder that even warriors do not emerge untouched. She looked out at the crowd. For a moment, she forgot the speech. Then she looked down at Echo. His eyes found hers, steady as always. She swallowed and began. "I used to think silence meant emptiness, that if the world got quiet, it was because something had been taken from it." She paused, her voice trembling just slightly. "But over the past year, I've learned something else. Silence can mean listening. It can mean remembering. And sometimes it means a space waiting to be filled with something better." A light breeze swept over the hilltop, catching the ends of her hair. Echo didn't move. He never did during moments like this. He just listened. Arya continued. "This ridge was once the center of something cruel, a place where secrets were buried, where my parents tried to stand against something bigger than them and paid the price." She turned, hand brushing the stone. "But they didn't die for nothing. And today, we begin something new here." Behind her, the tarp over the small wooden sign was pulled free by 2 children. The sign read, "The Echo Project, a healing initiative for children and rescue dogs. Because survival is not the end, it's the beginning." Applause rose like sunlight, warm, scattered, imperfect. Echo stood. Arya placed a gentle hand on his back. Down the path, volunteers opened the gates to a nearby log lodge, once an old ranger's outpost, now refurbished with books, kennels, a therapy room, and hand-painted murals done by local kids. Inside, a girl with a scar along her collarbone reached out to pet a one-eyed golden retriever. In another room, a boy who hadn't spoken in weeks whispered a name, Tango, and the mutt at his side wagged its tail for the first time in days. Walter stood by the railing, eyes glassy but proud. He didn't need to say anything. His presence here, his survival, was enough. Later that afternoon, Arya stayed behind on the ridge. The crowd had drifted down the path. The wind was picking up again, but she didn't mind. Not anymore. She sat cross-legged before the memorial stone, sketchbook in hand. "I hope you saw that," she murmured. "It's starting." She didn't expect an answer, but in the distance a hawk circled once above the ridge before disappearing behind the tree line. She smiled. then felt something cold press into her side. Echo. He nudged her, then sat down beside the stone. She leaned against him, arms around his neck. "You brought us through it," she whispered. "All of it." His tail brushed the ground once, just once. And that was enough. Because somewhere, in the hush between wind gusts, it felt like the mountain exhaled. The sun cast long golden lines across the fields behind the lodge, and the late afternoon sky carried that quiet hush only autumn can give, crisp, full of light, but edged with the promise of something fading. Echo bounded through the tall grass, now fully recovered. His gait was steady, strong, like a rhythm rediscovered. No longer a soldier bracing for war, but a guardian enjoying peace. A boy tossed a red cloth ball into the field, and Echo darted after it, tail high, muscles fluid beneath his coat. Laughter echoed behind him, high, full, alive. Arya stood near the wooden fence, watching. She wore a scarf her mother had once knitted, frayed a little at the ends, but warm. Around her neck was a silver pendant shaped like a pine cone, one of the last things she'd found in the pocket of her father's ranger vest. Today was their first full-circle day, a new tradition at the Echo Project, a day where children could simply be, without therapy labels, without whispered pity, just joy, play, and connection. Arya had helped design it. She turned as a soft voice behind her asked, "Is it okay if I sit here?" A girl, maybe 8 or 9, stood with a tentative expression. Her arms clutched a faded backpack. Her sleeves covered her wrists entirely, though the fall air was mild. "Of course," Arya said, stepping aside. The girl climbed onto the bench beside her. She didn't speak for a while. Arya didn't mind. Some silences don't ask to be filled. Then, "They said I'd get to meet a dog, a special one, but I think maybe he won't like me." Arya smiled gently. "You're talking about Rollo?" The girl nodded, eyes barely rising. "He's a little nervous too," Arya said. "He used to be tied up for a long time before someone found him. So now he's still figuring out how to trust people again." The girl stayed quiet. Arya continued. "Sometimes we think we have to be strong to meet someone new. But really, it's okay to be scared. Dogs know the difference between fake smiles and real hearts." The girl looked down at her sneakers. "What if I mess up?" "Then you try again, like Rollo does." They sat in silence again. Then Echo padded over, tongue lolling, and nudged Arya's side affectionately before flopping down at her feet. The girl's eyes widened. "He's really big." "He is," Arya said, ruffling his ears. "But his heart's even bigger." Echo turned to the girl slowly, as if sensing the tremble in her breath. He didn't rush her. He simply inched forward, then sat, waiting. The girl's fingers twitched. Her shoes tapped lightly together. "Can I?" Arya nodded. The girl held out her hand. It hovered uncertainly, trembling just enough to catch the light. Echo pressed his nose into it, gently, warmly. The girl gasped, and then smiled, a real one. Across the field, Walter leaned against the railing of the wraparound porch, a mug of tea in his hands. His face had healed mostly scars, faint now beneath the gray in his beard. But there was a softness to his expression that hadn't been there before, a looseness in the shoulders. Peace, earned not through the absence of battle, but through surviving it, scars and all. He watched Arya and Echo, then the little girl. He watched how Echo didn't need commands anymore, how he simply knew when he was needed. Walter smiled. From behind him came the creak of the door. One of the counselors stepped out with a clipboard. "New intake group arrives next week," she said. Walter sipped his tea. "Good. Let's make sure they have flannel blankets this time, the good kind, like Arya's mom used to keep in her cabin." The counselor chuckled. "You're turning this place into a second home." Walter nodded. "That's the point." He looked back out over the yard, and in that moment, with wind rustling the trees, children laughing, and the setting sun turning everything amber, he saw a circle closing, a loop of pain, love, survival, and return. It had taken a blizzard, a betrayal, a wound, a girl's courage, and the loyalty of a wounded dog to bring it all here. But now, healing had a home. The first snow came early that year. It began quietly, like a memory returning. No fanfare, no harsh wind, just the gentle descent of pale flakes over the roof of the cabin nestled at the edge of Echo Ridge. Outside, the pines stood still as sentinels, their branches catching the cold dust like outstretched hands cradling something sacred. Inside, the fire crackled softly, the scent of pine wood and cinnamon weaving through the warmth like a lullaby. Walter sat in his usual armchair, a thick knit blanket over his knees. His reading glasses had slipped halfway down his nose, a book resting unopened on his chest. His eyes weren't on the page, they were watching the girl. Arya sat cross-legged on the rug near the hearth, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. Her long sweater sleeves covered her hands as she moved the pencil with quiet concentration, shading and layering with care only found in people who have learned to see deeply. The only sound, aside from the fire, was the steady rhythm of Echo's breathing. He lay beside her, chin on his paws, one ear perked just slightly, as if still listening for a danger that would never come again. Arya glanced down at him. He looked up, eyes dark and soft, as if asking, "What are you drawing now, little one?" She smiled and returned to her sketch. The page held a single image, Echo, standing in the snow outside the cabin, his body half turned as if guarding both the woods and the warmth behind him. Snowflakes clung to his fur, but he stood unfazed, watchful, steady. Beneath the sketch, written in Arya's looping, careful script, was a single line. "Some echoes never fade." Later, when the kettle whistled, Walter rose and moved slowly to the stove, his movement slower than the winter before. Time had softened him, but also made every action more deliberate, like a man who had learned to carry both history and gratitude in equal measure. He poured 2 mugs of tea chamomile for her, black with honey for himself, and brought them over. "You didn't sign your name," he said quietly, glancing at the drawing. "I don't need to," Arya replied. "He knows it's us." Walter looked at Echo. "That he does." They sat in silence a while longer, sipping from the mismatched mugs. The firelight danced in their eyes, and the wind outside stirred the branches gently, as if nature itself had bowed into a whisper. Arya looked out the window. The forest was cloaked now, every branch and path softened into something dreamlike, a clean slate. But she didn't believe in blank slates anymore, not fully. She believed in scars that softened, in memories that stayed, in dogs who returned from the dark and chose again and again to love. Echo shifted beside her. His tail thumped once, slow, contented. "You're thinking about them again," Walter said. She nodded. "Your parents would be proud," he added. "I hope so." "They would," he repeated. "You didn't just survive, Arya. You built something. That takes more than strength. That takes heart." Her throat tightened. She reached out and ran her fingers through Echo's fur just behind his ears, his favorite spot. He leaned into her touch. "I miss them," she whispered. "I know. And sometimes I still hear them. In the trees, in the wind." Walter gave a small smile. "That's not something to be afraid of. That's what echoes are. Not ghosts. Reminders." She looked back down at her sketch. Then she closed the book gently and placed it on the windowsill. Tomorrow, she'd take it to the community room at the Echo Project and hang it next to the first crayon drawing she'd made of a blurry mountain and a big dog and a cabin that hadn't even existed yet. The journey between those two drawings told more than words ever could. Outside, the snow kept falling. Arya rose and opened the cabin door, just enough for the chill to greet them. She stood there for a moment, eyes wide, watching the flakes tumble against the porch light. Echo followed, nose pushing past her hip. He stepped out slowly, then turned, looking back at her as if to say, "Come on, just for a moment." She slipped on her boots and followed him, the porch creaking under her weight. She stood beside him, both of them facing the open white field. Their breaths rose like fog, like pieces of memory. Echo moved forward into the snow steady, unhurried. She watched as his figure faded slightly into the swirl of white, only to pause and glance back again, still watching, still protecting. And Arya knew then what Walter meant. Echo didn't just survive, he stayed, he healed, and in doing so he became something more than a dog. He became a living reminder that not all things lost are gone. Some return, some stay, some echoes never fade. In the hush of falling snow and the warmth of a cabin's fire, Arya's story reminds us that love can bloom even in the harshest winters. At the heart of her journey stands a German shepherd named Echo, wounded, loyal, and unwavering, who became more than just a companion. He became a symbol of resilience, of trust reborn, and of the unspoken bond between humans and animals. Through pain, healing, and rediscovery, this story shows how animals, especially dogs like Echo can, teach us the most profound human values: loyalty, empathy, courage, and second chances. Echo didn't just protect Arya. He helped her remember how to feel, how to draw, how to believe in goodness again. For every child who feels lost, and every animal who's been forgotten, the Echo Project stands as a testament that when we listen, love, and protect each other, no matter the species, we create echoes that last beyond a lifetime. May we all learn to see with kinder eyes, to listen with open hearts, and to love like a dog would, unconditionally, always.